I was saying thank you very much, Ambassador Zhang. Mr. President, it is indeed a great pleasure to have this opportunity to brief the Council on the situation at the nuclear facilities in Ukraine. As the Council knows, the IAEA has been actively assessing the situation in these facilities since the conflict began back in February. And you may recall that I had the opportunity to report on the state of affairs to you back in March. Since February 24, the IAEA has activated its Incident and Emergency Center, established regular contact with the Ukrainian authorities, and closely monitored the situation at these facilities, as well as activities involving radioactive sources and nuclear material in Ukraine. I have issued frequent, almost daily, updates on the IAEA website to ensure that everyone personally led 2 missions to provide assistance to Ukraine, one at the South Ukraine nuclear power plant in March, and subsequently a second one to the Chernobyl site in April. The agency has also been coordinating offers of assistance from our member states and facilitated the provision of equipment and radiation, such as personal protection equipment or radiation monitors. In total, up to now, 12 member states have offered assistance. The agency, myself, have been in frequent contact with both Ukraine and the Russian Federation to make sure we have the clearest picture possible of the evolving circumstances at this site. The agency has conducted 9 safeguards missions in Ukraine at the South Ukraine nuclear power plant, the Rivne nuclear power plant, Chemnitsky nuclear power plant, and the Chernobyl site and Kiev area, which are under IAEA safeguards pursuant to the NPT Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement that the agency has with Ukraine. These on-site inspections have enabled the agency to fulfill its obligatory safeguards objectives. Remote monitoring from IAEA headquarters of other nuclear power plants and the Chernobyl area remain ongoing. Most recently, I have had 2 teams at the Chernobyl site performing critical safeguards verification activities. The 2 expert missions to Ukraine, which I have led personally, as I said, allowed us to see for ourselves the situation on the ground and provide technical assistance, which has been already given and it's ongoing. There are, of course, a number of humanitarian, political, and legal issues which are in the remit of the Security Council, but our work, as you know very well, focus exclusively on technical issues related to the safety, the security, and the inspections, the safeguards inspections in Ukraine. Earlier in the year, and I had also an opportunity to recall this just a little more than a week ago when I was addressing the ongoing NPT review conference there in New York, I outlined a number of indispensable pillars, 7 of them, which are cardinal, which are crucial to ensure safety and security. These include, I will not enumerate them all, but they include in general crucial aspects dealing with the physical integrity, obviously the physical integrity of the plant, the off-site power supply, which, as you know, is indispensable for a nuclear plant for cooling systems to work, emergency preparedness measures and systems, and so on. The thing is that all these 7 pillars have been compromised if not entirely violated at one point or the other during this ongoing crisis. Legally speaking, when it comes to attacks or the possibility of attacks on nuclear facilities, we are, of course, not working on a vacuum. The international community has taken a stance very early on against this type of thing, and the additional protocols 1 and 2 to the 1949 Geneva Conventions prohibit such attacks against nuclear electrical, as it was said back in the day, generating stations in armed conflict. And on top of that, there have been a number of General Conference resolutions from the IAEA. So all of this is a framework that must be observed. We are all aware, and perhaps this meeting and this briefing takes place against the backdrop of this. Recently, the situation at the nuclear facilities, and in particular at the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant in Ukraine, have been deteriorating rapidly to the point of becoming very alarming. On 5th August, the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant was subject to shelling, resulting in several explosions within the site of a nuclear power plant. These explosions took place near the electrical switchboard of a 750 kilowatt external power supply that caused the shutdown of the electrical power transformer and 2 backup transformers. Consequently, 1 reactor unit was shut down and disconnected from the electrical grid. So you can see there is a direct link between these external interventions, attacks, and what's happening at the plant. The emergency protection system of the affected unit was triggered, and diesel generators were set into operation to ensure the power supply for this unit. This unit, as we speak, remains disconnected from the grid. There was also shelling in the area of the nitrogen oxygen station at the plant. Firefighters quickly extinguished this fire. However, repairs must be assessed, evaluated, and done. On August 6, 1 staff member of Zaporizhzhia working in the area of the dry spent nuclear fuel storage facility in the vicinity was injured during a new episode of shelling, which also caused some physical damage. Additionally, Ukraine has reported to us that Zaporizhzhia staff have restricted access to the on-site emergency crisis center. As of today, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant has limited availability of off-site power, 1 external high voltage line and 1 high voltage backup line to the thermal plant due to the damage of the shelling, from the shelling that I just referred. In particular, I remain very concerned about the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and I reiterate that any military action jeopardizing nuclear safety, nuclear security, must stop immediately. These military actions, dear colleagues, near such a large nuclear facility could lead to very serious consequences. Even before these most recent events, I had already expressed great concern about the extremely stressful and difficult conditions faced by the Ukrainian operating staff. The agency continues to monitor the situation to identify any potential implication that could arise at the facilities. Based on the most recent information, IAEA experts have preliminary assessed that there is no immediate threat to nuclear safety as a result of the shelling or other military actions. However, this could change at any moment. We certainly can all agree that any nuclear catastrophe would be unacceptable, and therefore preventing it should be our overarching goal. We must all work together to prevent it. That is our duty. That is our common responsibility. In order to help achieve that, I ask that both sides cooperate with the IAEA and allow for a mission to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to proceed as soon as possible. This huge facility, you are aware, it has been said many times, is currently in Russian-occupied territory, so it cannot be reached by traveling exclusively through Ukrainian-controlled territory. We have worked, and we need to work pragmatically with authorities of both countries in efforts to obtain access for our experts to Zaporizhzhia. I am personally ready to lead such a mission, as I did for South Ukraine and Chernobyl, leading a team of experts from the IAEA. We have been preparing for this, and time is of the essence. So I plead to hold this mission as soon as possible, Mr. President. Since the installation has been under the control of Russia, the IAEA has received information from Russia as well as from Ukraine, indicating the state of the facility, its operation, and the damage assessment. However, the contents of such statements are frequently contradictory. And without, I repeat, without a physical presence, the IAEA cannot corroborate some very important facts. It is those facts gathered during a site visit that are needed so that the IAEA may be able to develop and provide an independent assessment of the nuclear safety and security risks. Among other critical activities, what are we intending to do? We would assess the physical damage to the facilities. We will determine whether the main and backup safety and security systems are functional and evaluate the working conditions of the control room staff. The mission to the site will also allow us to perform urgent safeguards activities, verifying the status of the reactors and the inventories of nuclear material, including fresh and spent fuel storage, where we currently have no remote data transfer of surveillance. Furthermore, we need to perform maintenance on all IAEA safeguards equipment in order to ensure the remote data transmission and the maintenance of continuity of knowledge, which is indispensable after leaving the facility. Not only would a mission to Zaporizhzhia be beneficial to the work of the IAEA and to the assessment of the international community of what is going on, but I am convinced it would be beneficial to the operators and the regulators of the nuclear plant. The previous IAEA missions, which I have mentioned on a couple of occasions, to South Ukraine and Chernobyl were a proof that being there, establishing the facts, is what is needed at the moment. Overall, I also believe that our on-site presence will both allow us to carry the technical activities that I have just described and also provide a stabilizing influence. I want to underscore that the IAEA has been ready to perform such a mission since June, when we were ready to go. But unfortunately, due to political factors and other considerations, it was not possible. We've seen what has happened over the past 2 months. We cannot allow such factors to delay us any longer. I reiterate that the military actions that have even the smallest potential to jeopardize nuclear safety or nuclear security at such a nuclear installation must stop immediately. These actions could lead us to serious consequences. The IAEA is ready to help avert such an escalation of the crisis. I want to thank the Secretary General, who has been steadfast in his support to our mission. I had an opportunity to discuss with him a few days ago in New York. I have followed his statements of support, without which our work would be tremendously more difficult. And I thank the Security Council for having given me this opportunity to state some facts and to also reiterate that this is a serious hour, great hour, and the IAEA must be allowed to conduct its mission to Zaporizhzhia as soon as possible. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank Mr. Grossi for his briefing. I now give the floor to the members of the Security Council. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we're grateful to the IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi for his briefing. Mr. President, we repeatedly warned our Western colleagues that if they didn't talk some sense into the Kiev regime, then it would take the most monstrous and irrational steps, the consequences of which would reverberate far beyond the borders of Ukraine. Unfortunately, that is what is now happening. Kiev's criminal attacks on nuclear infrastructure are pushing the world to the brink of nuclear catastrophe, comparable in scale with Chernobyl. In recent days, the Ukrainian Armed Forces have repeatedly used heavy artillery and multiple launch rocket systems to shell the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant. These strikes are a direct threat to the nuclear security of the plant. On the 5th of August, as a result of just one such strike, a number of important objects for electricity and gas supply to the plant were damaged, pipelines were destroyed, and a hydrogen combustion incident at the hub took place. A high-voltage power line was also knocked out. I would like to underscore that the Ukrainian Armed Forces are shelling the plant and shelled the plant during the shift change. Clearly, the aim of the Kiev regime was to intimidate the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant's staff, that is to say their own citizens, to prevent them from going to work and, in so doing, to undermine the normal functioning of the plant. On the 6th of August, the Ukrainian Armed Forces attacked the plant with the use of cluster munitions. The shrapnel from those munitions hit an area near a dry spent fuel storage facility and also an automated radiation monitoring post, and one of the plant's staff members was also wounded. As a result of Ukrainian Armed Forces shelling on the 7th of August, there was a power surge in the network feeding the nuclear power plant. Equipment was damaged, which led to the automatic disconnecting of the power line. At Energy Unit number 4, which was working at 10% capacity, the electricity supply for the nuclear power plant protection management system was knocked out and the emergency protection system was triggered. The Ukrainian staff of the nuclear power plant were forced to suspend the operation of one of the 3 remaining energy blocks, and the capacity capacity of the remaining two was reduced to 50% of maximum. Mass strikes by the Ukrainian Armed Forces on the outskirts of Energodar led to the severing of power lines more than 40 times and the loss of power supply. Among those living in Energodar, many of which are workers of the nuclear power plant, there are those who have been killed and wounded. Particularly sacrilegious is the fact that a number of attacks on the nuclear power plant were carried out at night while people were sleeping. Today, Ukrainian Armed Forces attacks on the power plant and Energodar are continuing. Strikes were launched with the use of multiple launch rocket systems and heavy artillery from the right bank of the Dnieper River from the territory of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, as well as Nikopol, Marganets, and Tomakovka, which are controlled by Kiev. According to data from the regional administration, the Ukrainian Armed Forces has aimed its weapons at the concrete storage facilities of radioactive waste. For the time being, they have not been able to hit them and do serious damage. The background radiation at the nuclear power plant at the moment is within limits, but if the strikes continue, it is only a question of time. We regularly send to the IAEA Secretariat information bulletins with a detailed outline of the situation and these incidents. Mr. President, what has been taking place in the last few days at the nuclear power plant is the culmination of the criminal actions of the Kiev regime against nuclear infrastructure and the staff serving those facilities, which for months has gone without any international reaction. In the period from April to July, Kiev carried out a number of provocations against the nuclear power plant with the use of drones, including drones made in Poland. Some of them were shot down. Some of them, explosive-laden kamikaze drones, detonated near critically important infrastructure. It was only thanks to a happy accident that this did not lead to the disrupting of the normal functioning of the plant. Previously, in February, Ukrainians seized 4 Russian specialists who were accompanying a supply of nuclear fuel to the Rovno nuclear power plant. They were intimidated and pressure was put them in line with the traditional methods used by terrorist groups. On the 9th of March, Ukrainian saboteurs blew up a power line feeding the cooling system for the spent nuclear fuel storage facility at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. It was only thanks to the efforts of the Russian forces that it was possible to avoid an accident by urgently activating diesel generators and ensuring the supply of electricity to the plant through an alternative power line from the territory of Belarus. The sabotage group also blew up the only bridge that connected the plant with the town housing the plant's personnel. The replacement shift for a long time was not able to come to work. In parallel with this, they were processed by the Ukrainian special forces who were threatening them with reprisals for cooperating with the occupiers. And in Kiev, at the same time, they were publicly shedding crocodile tears and reporting to the IAEA saying that Russian forces were preventing the rotation of these shifts in the plant. At the 10th Review Conference of the NPT, which is taking place at the moment in New York, the Kiev regime representatives, with the support of a number of other delegations, are making cynical and absurd accusations, saying that Russia is attacking the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. These propaganda attacks are being seized upon by the Western press. All of this is being done contrary to common sense because the nuclear power plant is controlled by Russian armed forces. Elementary logic would suggest that our soldiers would have no reason to shell either the plant or the town or themselves even. On the 4th of March this year, Western countries convened the Security Council over the situation around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, trying to present Ukraine's sabotage, that is to say, setting fire to the training center building, as the actions of Russian forces, even though the plant at the time was under their full control. I would remind you that back then, Under-Secretary General Mr. Carlo said that attacks on nuclear facilities were a violation of international humanitarian law. The representative of the United Kingdom said that international law pointed to the need for particular protection for nuclear facilities. The representative of the United States said that the world, by the grace of God, had avoided a nuclear catastrophe, that an attack on the plant was an extremely irrational step, and that conflicts should not involve nuclear objects. The representative of France said that it was necessary to guarantee the security of the nuclear power plant. Are you prepared to repeat all of that now, as applies to the actions of the Ukrainian side, and call on Kiev to stop the shelling? I would like to underscore that each time the Ukrainian armed forces launched strikes on the nuclear power plant, a disaster was avoided only thanks to the selfless joint work of the plant workers and the Russian service personnel who provided them with a comprehensive emergency support when necessary. Fire and accident personnel and also our service personnel worked hand in hand. This clearly indicates that between our soldiers and the Ukrainian specialists there is absolutely normal communication operating. Mr. President, from the very outset we've supported the efforts of the IAEA to ensure the nuclear and physical nuclear security of nuclear facilities in Ukraine. We thought that the Director General Grossi's 7 principles in this area would be at the heart of a trilateral document in the format Russia, Ukraine, IAEA. However, the Kiev regime refused to sign this. Then we showed flexibility and agreed that in that case we could have an agreement in the form of 2 parallel agreements, Russia with the IAEA and Ukraine with the IAEA. Kiev rejected that option as well without providing any clear arguments or reasons for rejecting it. But the essence of that is clear, because even then Kiev was hatching dangerous plans to disrupt the normal functioning of the Zaporizhzhia and Chernobyl nuclear power plants and to blame Russia for that. We are strictly complying with those 7 principles, and we do everything that we can to ensure that representatives of the agency can see this with their own eyes. On the 3rd of June this year, Russia and the leadership of the IAEA Secretariat fully agreed on the route and schedule for the movement of an international agency mission to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. That mission, which would include prominent specialists from a number of countries, it was planned that the mission would be led personally by Director General Grossi. The aims for the mission were exclusively technical in nature. They involved implementing the IAEA's mandate, assessing the state of the largest nuclear power plant in Europe and conducting an inventory of the nuclear material contained there as stipulated in the Safeguards Agreement. Closest cooperation with the agency meant that we were able to resolve all of the difficult issues related to organizing and conducting what is such a difficult but such a necessary activity in these conditions. However, at the last minute, the red light was given by the UN Department of Safety and Security, and the trip was cancelled, and that was seized upon by the Kiev authorities to step up their provocations and shelling of the nuclear power plant. We are convinced that cancelling the international mission played into the hands of the Kiev regime and its Western backers, who initially were opposed to the idea of the trip. They did not want the IAEA to see that the nuclear power plant was functioning normally and that the staff were working in a healthy and normal environment. We trust and we hope that soon the IAEA's experts' visit to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant will happen soon. We hope that in this situation the UN Secretary General will acknowledge the full weight of his responsibility and will not, via the subordinate departments to him in the Secretariat or any other links in the UN's mechanism, do anything to hinder the conduct of this mission. For our part, we stand ready to provide all possible assistance to resolving all organizational matters. We believe it justified for IAEA representatives to go to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant as quickly as possible and possibly even before the end of August. However, far from everything depends on us. There are no guarantees that the trip will take place that we can currently provide. It's hard for us to judge what is currently being cooked up by the Ukrainian leadership, which for several days in a row has been launching strikes on the nuclear power plant, even though the UN Secretary General described any attacks on nuclear facilities as suicide. We believe it is unacceptable that the IAEA's mission should take place in the conditions of continuing Ukrainian Armed Forces shelling of the plant and the territory around the town of Energodar. Kiev must immediately cease and guarantee the absence of intentions to present any threat to the life and health of international staff. We call on states that support the Kiev regime to bring their proxies into check, to compel them to immediately and once and for all stop attacks on Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and the residents of Energodar, and to ensure the safe conditions for the conduct of the IAEA mission. We call upon the leadership of the UN and the IAEA to demonstrate their leadership and global responsibility to, very precisely, without any diplomatic formulations, to indicate the real source of the threat to nuclear security of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. That is to say, the strikes from the Ukrainian armed forces, and to tell the Ukrainian authorities that these actions are unacceptable. This is the only way to prevent a major radiation catastrophe on the European continent, the risk of which is now more real than ever. If Ukrainian armed forces attacks continue, this could take place at any time. Then the threat of radiation contamination would loom over the territories of Kiev, Zaporizhzhia, Kharkov, Poltava, Kherson, Odessa, Nikolaevsk, Kirovograd, Vinnytsia Oblast, as well as Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, the border regions of Russia and Belarus, and also Moldova, Bulgaria, and Romania. And that's even according to the most optimistic expert forecasts. The real scale of a nuclear disaster at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is hard to imagine. Full responsibility for this would, in that case, lie upon the Western backers of Kiev. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ghana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me begin by thanking Mr. Rafael Grossi, Director General of the IAEA, for his briefing on the deeply concerning situation at the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant in Ukraine. The information provided confirms our fears of a growing risk of a potential nuclear incident with catastrophic consequences for human lives and the environment if the indiscriminate shelling of the facility does not cease forthwith. Ghana unequivocally condemns the militarization of the precinct of Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant, as well as the deliberate attacks on the power lines and sensitive units of the facility. It appears that the attacks are taking place with no due regard to the deadly consequences that these unacceptable actions could lead to, particularly the accidental emissions of radioactive material. We also call for the unconditional withdrawal and removal of all military personnel and equipment and insist on the return of the facility to its accredited personnel. We welcome the public pronouncement of Secretary General Antonio Guterres regarding the rapidly developing grave situation and hereby fully endorses his call for an immediate access to be granted to international inspectors from the IAEA to enable an independent assessment of the nuclear facility standards and safeguards of the facility. Under no circumstances should nuclear facilities intended for peaceful purposes be subjected to such attacks. We call for the immediate and full respect for the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material and its 2005 amendment by all the armed parties. Mr. President, the world can ill afford another nuclear disaster. We cannot forget too soon the horrors of the 1986 Chernobyl accident and the consequent nuclear catastrophe, which left in its wake long-term effects of radiation exposure to many people in Ukraine and parts of Europe even to date. The warnings of the IAEA must therefore be soberly reflected on by this Council and should galvanize us to quickly deploy every effort in a unified manner to assist the IAEA to mitigate and suppress any risk of accidental emissions at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear facility. Ghana believes that ultimately the cessation of the military hostilities anchored on a complete and unconditional withdrawal of the troops of Russian Federation from the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine is the only acceptable pathway to the restoration of the peace and security of Ukraine. In this regard, we continue to strongly urge a pacifist settlement of the substantive security concerns of the parties in line with the Charter and appeal to all other actors to refrain from escalatory actions and activities that only seek to prolong the war, perpetuate the tensions, and aggravate the security concerns of the parties. Mr. President, as the senseless war lingers on, civilians are bearing innumerable hardships and human lives are being lost daily. It is important for the parties to exercise restraint and halt the use of force in all areas of critical infrastructure, including the nuclear power plants, and to respect their international obligations to protect human lives and to prevent a potential disaster. Admittedly, the war in Ukraine continues to have devastating consequences beyond the battlefield. The rippling effects, combined with the economic disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, have contributed to constrain the fiscal space of many governments and led to spiraling food prices, which threatens to push millions into acute hunger and roll back development gains. The situation of developing countries appears to be dire and require urgent actions on a global scale, including debt forgiveness and restructuring to assist them navigate the current volatile global economic environment in order to preserve their stability. It is hoped that this Council, together with the international community, could explore new support measures and appropriate responses to protect vulnerable populations in member states. I conclude by expressing Ghana's strong support for the peaceful resolution of this conflict sooner than later. We urge further constructive engagement by the parties at all levels in the pursuit of their security interests and the maintenance of international peace and security. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ghana for her statement. I now give the floor to Undersecretary of Arms Control and International Security of the United States of America, Ms. Bonnie Jenkins.
Thank you, Director General Grossi, for your briefing on the situation at the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant in Ukraine. We welcome the IAEA's steadfast commitment to addressing the situation there and to nuclear safety worldwide. The United States continues to closely monitor reports regarding the situation at the Zephorosia facility, noting considerable concern regarding the risk of a nuclear incident that would endanger the people of Ukraine, neighboring states, and the international community. The cause of the situation at the Zaporizhzhia facility is not a mystery. It is another tragic result of the Russian Federation's decision to further invade its sovereign neighbor, Ukraine. Russia's full-scale invasion has resulted in thousands of civilians killed or wounded to date, and has violated the UN Charter and the principles of international law. The full-scale invasion has also contributed to a spike in global food insecurity, driven energy market volatility, and now heightened the risk of a catastrophic nuclear incident with consequences that could be felt in Ukraine and far beyond. It is especially galling that Russia's actions are taking place during the ongoing review conference of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, being held just down the hall from where we sit. Russia's behavior could not more directly undercut the shared interests of the states parties in strengthening non-proliferation, disarmament, and peaceful uses of nuclear energy. The solution for what is happening at the Zephorosia facility is straightforward. The United States calls for the Russian Federation to immediately withdraw its forces from Ukraine's territory. This would allow for Ukraine to restore the impeccable safety, security, and safeguards performance it upheld for decades at the facility. Russia continues to deploy disinformation to distract from the realities on the ground, and now claims that Ukraine is culpable for the situation at the Zaporizhzhia facility. This completely ignores the real issue, which is Russia's illegal presence at the facility. Russia alone created risks, and when it launched a full-scale invasion, and it can eliminate those risks now by withdrawing from Ukraine. In the absence of such a withdrawal, however, there are steps we must take now to minimize the risks. To start, the United States reiterates the importance of facilitating access for IAEA personnel to address nuclear safety, security, and safeguards concerns at the Zaporizhzhia facility, as well as at other nuclear facilities around the country, in a manner that respects Ukrainian sovereignty. This visit cannot wait any longer. We once again call on Russia to cease all military operations at or near Ukraine's nuclear facilities and insist that Russia immediately return full control of the Zephorosia facility to Ukraine. We are also aware of claims of mistreatment of the power plant's Ukrainian staff by Russian soldiers, and note that, if true, such treatment would be inconsistent with the IAEA 7 pillars of nuclear safety and security, which Russia has endorsed. Ukrainian staff must be allowed to fulfill their important duties free from the pressure of Russia's armed forces. The United States also supports Ukraine's proposal to create a demilitarized zone around the Zaporizhzhia plant. Reports, such as that by the IAEA we heard today, underscore the urgency of the situation. But what is happening at this nuclear power plant is not the only alarming situation we face in the areas where Russia's forces operate in Ukraine. Russia has expanded its aims in Ukraine and seeks to dismantle it as a geopolitical entity, dissolving it from the world map. We are now getting a clearer picture of what life is like in an area under Russian military control. Through intimidation, censorship, and propaganda, Russia is clearly laying the foundation to try, once again, to legally annex territory from its neighbor. None of us should be surprised if Russia suddenly announces false referenda in these regions as a pretext to grabbing more of Ukraine's sovereign territory. The many consequences of this conflict, including the situation at the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant, will only end when Russia ends this war. Today, the United States demands particularly urgent action to address the nuclear risks posed by Russia's latest moves. This must be done through the work of the IAEA and a return of full control of the Zaporizhzhia facility to Ukraine. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Jenkins for a statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Gabon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le directeur général de l'IAEA, Monsieur Rafael Grossi,
Director
pour son
General, Mr.
exposé.
Rafael Grossi, for his
Je
briefing.
voudrais d'emblée dire la grande
At the outset, I'd like
préoccupation de mon
to
pays
express my country's
face à
grave
l'intensification des
concern
combats
in light
et à
of
la
the intensifying
pérennisation de la
fighting
guerre en
and the
Ukraine.
perpetuation of the war in Ukraine.
Depuis samedi dernier,
Since
à la
last
suite d'attaques
Saturday,
visant la
following
centrale
attacks
nucléaire de
against the Zaporizhzhia
Zaporizhzhia,
nuclear
les
plant,
risques de catastrophes
the
nucléaires
risks
sont
of a
visiblement
nuclear
devenus
disaster
considérables
have risen to a
avec la
considerable level
non-conformité à 5 des
with
7 principes
non-compliance with
garantissant
5
la
of the
sécurité des
7
sites
principles
nucléaires.
guaranteeing the security
La
of nuclear sites.
concentration d'une activité
The
militaire
build-up of
autour du
military
site
activity
nucléaire
around the
doit
nuclear
absolument
plant
cesser.
absolutely must stop.
Les parties ont la
The parties
responsabilité
are
de mettre fin
responsible
à
for
toute activité
putting a
susceptible
stop
de faire courir
to
au monde
any
le risque
activity
d'une
that might
catastrophe
expose the
nucléaire.
world to the risk of a nuclear
Toute
disaster.
militarisation de
Any
sites
militarization
nucléaires
of nuclear
est
sites is
inacceptable.
unacceptable.
L'ampleur des risques
The
encourus doit
scale of the
interpeller
risks
tous les
involved
belligérants
should be
et
a wake-up
l'ensemble de la
call
communauté
to all of the
internationale.
belligerents and to the
Nous
whole of the
exhortons
international
les parties
community.
à se
We
conformer
urge the
aux règles de
parties to
sécurité nucléaire
comply
en
with
vigueur,
current
à cesser
nuclear
tout
security
bombardement
rules,
visant
to
les sites
halt
nucléaires
all shelling
et à
of the
et
nuclear
à
sites and
éviter
to
au monde le risque d'une
avoid
catastrophe
exposing
dont
the
les
world to the
conséquences
risk of
seraient
a
irréparables.
catastrophe with
Mon
irreparable
pays appelle les
consequences.
parties à
My
coopérer avec
country
l'IAEA
calls on the
pour
parties to
sécuriser les
cooperate
sites
with the
potentiellement
IAEA
dangereux
to
en
secure the
vue de
potentially
prévenir les
dangerous
risques de
sites
catastrophe.
in order to prevent
Il
the
est en
risks of a
outre urgent
disaster.
que
Further,
les
it is urgent
174
for the
conteneurs de
174
combustible nucléaire
containers of
usés
spent
soient mis à
nuclear
l'abri
fuel
des
to be
activités
sheltered
militaires
from
de
any
toutes sortes.
type of military activity.
À cet égard,
In this
une
regard,
mission technique de
an
l'IAEA
IAEA
sur site
technical mission to
paraît
the site
indispensable.
seems crucial.
Nous appelons les
We
parties à
call on the
s'accorder
parties
sur les
to
modalités d'une
agree
telle
on
mission
the
qui,
modalities of such a
d'après la
mission,
situation qui
which,
vient de nous
in
être
line of
exposée,
with the
est plus
situation that's just been
qu'urgente.
described, appears to be more than
Monsieur le
urgent.
Président, la
Mr.
signature
President,
d'un accord il y a quelques
the
semaines
signing
en
of
vue
an
de
agreement just a few
l'exportation des
weeks ago
céréales
for
retenues dans
the
les ports
export
ukrainiens
of grain
est un
held at
signe
Ukrainian
d'espoir sur la
ports is a
trajectoire vers
glimmer
la
of
paix.
hope on the path towards
Cet
peace.
élan devrait
This
être mis à
momentum
profit
should be
pour
harnessed
envisager des
to
négociations
plan for
pour un
potential
cessez-le-feu en
negotiations
vue de
for a
négocier la
ceasefire
fin
in order
des
to
hostilités.
negotiate the end of
Mon
hostilities.
pays réitère son
My country
opposition à la
reiterates
guerre
its
et
opposition to
réaffirme son
the war
attachement
and
à la
reaffirms
résolution
its
pacifique
commitment
des
to the
conflits.
peaceful
Nous
resolution of
encourageons tous
conflicts.
les efforts
We
politiques
encourage
et
all
diplomatiques
political and
visant à mettre
diplomatic
fin
efforts
à
aimed at bringing
l'escalade
an end to
et
the
parvenir à un
escalation
accord
and
pour une
achieving
paix
an
durable
agreement for a
entre les
lasting
parties.
peace
Je
between
vous
the
remercie.
parties. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Gabon for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of United Arab Emirates.
Mr. President, I would like to thank Director General Grossi for his valuable briefing. The United Arab Emirates is deeply alarmed by recent events at and near the Zephorosia nuclear power plant, including the reported damage to critical infrastructure, the external power supply system, and the radiation sensors. These developments illustrate the disastrous ramifications of the ongoing conflict, not just for Ukraine, but for the wider region and the world. When it comes to nuclear matters, our collective security is truly intertwined. A miscalculation, a mistake, a reckless act could result in a humanitarian and environmental catastrophe that would affect millions of lives. In this context, it is crucial that the IAEA have full, unimpeded access to the site in order to assess the damage and ascertain the safety of the facility. We support the 7 pillars of nuclear safety and security outlined by Director General Grossi in the beginning of March, and remind parties of their importance in maintaining the safe operation of the Zaporizhzhia plant and other facilities that may be caught up in the conflict. We further recall the special protections for nuclear power facilities under international law, including Article 56 of Additional Protocol 1 to the Geneva Conventions, which makes clear that works or installations containing dangerous forces, including nuclear generating stations, shall not be made the object of attack, even where these objects are military objectives. These facilities are protected under international law for a reason. Not only are they critical civilian infrastructure, but there are also immense risks to human life when nuclear facilities become vulnerable due to conflict. Ensuring the safety of nuclear facilities is therefore of the utmost importance and is a critical issue for the UAE. Mr. President, with the agreement on agricultural exports, we witness the potential for positive developments when backed by active and involved diplomacy and broad international support. The high stakes of nuclear safety and security and the international community's manifest concern should therefore make this a focus of constructive and necessary engagement between the parties. These efforts can in turn pave the path for a broader settlement that ends this devastating conflict. We therefore reiterate the need for ongoing dialogue to bring the conflict to a peaceful, sustainable resolution in a way that is consistent with the UN Charter and international law. We re-emphasize the importance of achieving a cessation of hostilities throughout Ukraine. The alarming developments at Zaporizhzhia underline the urgency of finding a diplomatic end to this conflict, which continues to cause a staggering humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. Despite the difficulties facing this Council, we must work towards fulfilling its mandate and take incremental and pragmatic steps to prevent further suffering. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of UAE for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Norway.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me start by thanking Director General Grossi for his briefing and for providing frequent, factual updates on matters within the agency's mandate. The Director General has outlined 7 indispensable pillars for nuclear safety and security. We note with great distress that the Russian forces have violated several of them during their military aggression against Ukraine. Norway strongly condemns Russia's illegal and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, which has gone on for half a year. President, in March, the IAEA Board of Governors adopted a resolution deploring the Russian Federation's forcefully seizing control of nuclear facilities. The board expressed, and I quote, grave concern that the Russian Federation's aggression is impeding the agency from fully and safely conducting safeguards verification activities at Ukrainian nuclear facilities, unquote. We call on Russia to return full control of all Ukrainian nuclear facilities to their Ukrainian operators. The ongoing war has disrupted direct communication lines between them and the Ukrainian regulator. This is extremely dangerous. Nuclear safety and security deteriorate from the presence of an armed aggressor. The staff operating the facilities are under psychological and physical stress, and they are at the mercy of an invading force. This is not conducive to the safe operation of nuclear facilities. Norway has had a long-standing cooperation with Ukraine on nuclear safety and security, and we commend Ukraine for its commitment and dedication to ensuring continuing nuclear safety and security in the country under these severe circumstances. President, damage to and destruction of civilian infrastructure is unacceptable. It must always be protected in accordance with international humanitarian law. We are concerned that Russia's occupation of nuclear power plants in Ukraine means also seizing control over the central sources of electricity for the Ukrainian civilian population. In closing, President, Norway again underlines that the Russian Federation must immediately withdraw its forces from Ukraine's internationally recognized borders and cease all threats and military actions. This would restore Ukraine's abilities to ensure safe and secure operations at nuclear facilities. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Norway for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you. Mr. President, I thank Director Grossi for his clear and comprehensive briefing. Brazil has been following with great concern news about recent shelling incidents at the facilities of Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant in Ukraine. As unanimously recognized by the IAEA General Conference, any armed attack on and threat against nuclear facilities devoted to peaceful purposes constitutes a violation of the principles of the UN Charter, international law, and the statute of the agency. We reiterate that all parties concerned have a responsibility to ensure compliance with the applicable instruments on nuclear safety and security, including the Convention on Nuclear Safety, the Joint Convention on the Safety of Spent Fuel, and the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material and its amendment. Mr. President, during the ongoing NPT review conference, state parties have been insisting on the need to promote nuclear safety and security, as well as risk reduction. The urgency of translating those words into action is increasingly evident. While the IAEA assessment that there was no immediate threat to nuclear safety as a result of Saturday's incident gives us some relief, we cannot lose sight of the fact that recent events have breached virtually all the 7 pillars outlined by the Director General Rafael Grossi earlier this year. The absence of immediate threat does not mean the absence of threat. It only means that the parties still have a chance to avoid a disaster. Mr. President, what makes the situation so alarming is precisely the fact that we are fully aware of the catastrophic and lasting consequences for human health and the environment that any damage to the Zaporizhzhia power plant would entail. We therefore call on all parties to refrain from any measure that could jeopardize the safety and security of the NPP as well as its safe operation. As DG Grossi recently stated, the current situation is untenable. We echo the calls for the deployment of an IAEA expert mission to the Zaporizhzhia NPP without delay. And I thank you.
I thank you for your statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Mr. President, we thank the IAEA Director General Grossi for his information, his clarifications, and for his leadership. He was crystal clear during his address at the general debate of the 10th NPT conference still going on, as he was today. IAEA should be fully involved everywhere in Ukraine in order to help prevent a nuclear disaster there. He must be listened to and his request must be met. Colleagues, there would not be a meeting of the Council and we would not be discussing this issue if it wasn't for the Russian invasion of Ukraine, if this unjustified and senseless war that is continuing to this hour had not started. We and the entire world are now familiar with its disastrous impact on every aspect of human life and activity, including, as feared more than once, with increased nuclear risks with potentially disastrous consequences. Isn't it ironic that while the 10th review conference of the NPT is underway and the entire world hopes for tangible progress on the 3 pillars of the NPT, we meet, sadly, to talk about a persistent serious risk on a nuclear plant in Ukraine, which threatens Ukraine and its population, but not only its neighboring countries, but also the European continent and beyond. Let me recall one fundamental fact that is way more than a curiosity. Until Russia's invasion of Ukraine, no nuclear plant has been ever attacked, overrun, occupied, and reportedly militarized by an invading army. It is the first time that this is happening as a result of Russia's war of choice, and it has created one of the worst precedents. There is countless evidence that the Russian forces have been and continue to conduct their ugly war recklessly and with brutality. There is a legitimate concern, therefore, that Russian forces may directly or indirectly cause a serious or severe nuclear accident and take other actions that may result in the exposure of Ukraine's population to ionizing radiation, all while accusing the victims as victims of such actions. Such dreadful concerns have been validated by the shelling of a nuclear research institute in Kharkiv, as well as by overrunning and occupying Europe's biggest nuclear power station at Zaporizhzhia. In the course of the last 6 months of the war, Russia has carried out indiscriminate ground and air attacks upon civilian infrastructure at residential areas, causing thousands of innocent victims. Further, cyber warfare against targets in Ukraine, including electric power grid installations and systems, have reportedly been linked with Russian actors and interests. Making full clarity on the situation on the power plant in Zaporizhzhia is critical, and this must be carried out through the international eyes, meaning the IAEA missions. Colleagues, Russia's action constitutes a serious and irresponsible breach of nuclear safety rules and are another example of its blatant disregard for international law and international norms. They undermine the IAEA's ability to monitor Ukraine's peaceful nuclear activities for safeguarding purposes. As rightly stated by the G7 foreign ministers recently, and I quote, "It is Russia's continued control of the plant that endangers the region. Therefore, the longer the war continues, the greater the likelihood that additional nuclear challenges and risk may arise related to the need of Ukraine's nuclear energy program for equipment maintenance and other related issues which would not be conducted normally just because of the war." Albania reiterates its full and continued support for the IAEA and for its staff to be able to access all nuclear facilities in Ukraine, safe and without impediment, and engage directly and without interference with the Ukrainian personnel responsible for the operation of these facilities. The safety of all individuals implementing those efforts must be addressed to strengthen nuclear safety, security, and safeguards in Ukraine. Albania condemns any act of violence perpetrated inside or near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant or against its personnel. The Ukrainian personnel operating the plant under Russian occupation must be able to carry out their important tasks without restriction, threats, or pressure. Unfortunately, as we have seen, the 7 safety pillars essential to maintaining nuclear safety and security, defined at the start of the war by the IAEA, have all been compromised at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. We reiterate our call on the Russian Federation to stop the war and immediately withdraw all its armed forces from Ukrainian nuclear facilities and from the entire Ukrainian territory. Let me conclude, like others, because it's important, Mr. President, by recalling what Director General Grossi has said repeatedly, including at the GA. If an accident occurs at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, we will not have a natural disaster to blame. We'll only have ourselves to answer to. Actually, we know who is to be blamed, but we hope we will never come to it. And for this, there is need for concrete action, since inaction is unconscionable. Nuclear safety should not be compromised. It should not be politicized, and it should not be used for military tactic advantages. This is not a time for empty words, for biased narratives or blame game, but for the immediate and strict application of the IAEA safety procedures and protocols in Ukraine. I thank you.
I thank you for your statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of India.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me begin by thanking Director General Rafael Grossi for his update, focusing on the safety and security of nuclear facilities in Ukraine. We continue to carefully follow developments regarding the safety and security of Ukraine's nuclear power reactors and facilities. India attaches high importance to ensuring the safety and security of these facilities, as any accident involving nuclear facilities could potentially have serious consequences for public health and the environment. We also accord high priority to the discharge by the International Atomic Energy Agency of its safeguards and monitoring activities in accordance with its statute in an effective, non-discriminatory and efficient manner. And we value the efforts of the agency in this regard. We have noted the latest information available with regard to the nuclear power plants and facilities in Ukraine, including the updates published on 9 and 10 August by the IAEA, as well as today's updates on latest developments. India expresses its concern over the reports of shelling near the spent fuel storage facility of the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant. We call for mutual restraint so as not to endanger the safety and security of nuclear facilities. Mr. President, India continues to remain concerned over the situation in Ukraine. Since the beginning of the conflict, India has consistently called for an immediate cessation of hostilities and an end to violence. We've called upon both sides to return to the path of diplomacy and dialogue. We support all diplomatic efforts to end the conflict. While we are discussing the nuclear dimension of this conflict, we need also to be acutely cognizant of the impact of the Ukraine conflict on developing countries, particularly on the supply of food grains, fertilizer, and fuel. It is important for all of us to appreciate the importance of equity, affordability, and accessibility when it comes to food grains. Open markets must not become an argument to perpetuate inequity and promote discrimination. In this regard, we welcome the Secretary-General-backed initiative to open the export of grains from Ukraine via the Black Sea and the facilitation of the exports of Russian food and fertilizers. These efforts demonstrate that differences can be resolved through sustained dialogue and diplomacy, which has been the consistent position of India. Finally, Mr. President, we would continue to reiterate that the global order should be anchored on international law, the UN Charter, and respect for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of nation-states. Thank you.
I thank you for your statement. I give the floor to the representative of Kenya.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Mr. Grossi, Director General of the IAEA, for his briefing. We are having a discussion on the backdrop of the 10th Review Conference of the parties of NPT happening in these premises. The objective of this treaty is to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and weapons technology, promote cooperation in the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, and further, the goal of achieving nuclear disarmament and general complete disarmament. We are all alive to the fact that the use of these weapons, whether intentional or accidental, can have an apocalyptic effect on humanity, biodiversity, and the environment. Kenya, therefore, reaffirms its belief that the total elimination of nuclear weapons remains the only absolute guarantee against the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons. In this regard, we are deeply concerned by the reports of shelling of Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant. We note with relief that no damage was caused to the reactors themselves, nor was there any radiological release or reports of injuries, fully aware of the catastrophic effects of a stray or deliberate targeting of such an installation. We urge the need to safeguard the 7 indispensable pillars of nuclear safety and security as echoed by the Director General. We further urge the parties to refrain from any military action that could jeopardize nuclear safety and security in Ukraine. It is also essential that the IAEA be allowed to send a mission of nuclear safety, security, and safeguards experts to the site as soon as possible to conduct safeguards verification activities. Mr. President, beyond the dangers posed by an insecure nuclear power plant, Kenya remains concerned by the unabated strikes and shelling in various parts of Ukraine. With no meaningful ceasefire in sight, this war continues to cause untold suffering to the Ukrainian people. It also threatens to usher in a new era of major global war. Kenya continues to call for restraint from any actions that may further escalate the situation. And we reiterate the need to shift focus to an immediate cessation and the deployment of available diplomatic tools. Such cessation should set the foundation for the negotiation of a lasting peace settlement that guarantees the sovereignty, territorial integrity of Ukraine, while taking into consideration the security concerns of Russian Federation. Finally, Mr. President, I reaffirm Kenya's respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. I thank you.
I thank you for your statement. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président, et je remercie le directeur général de l'IAEA pour sa présentation. Monsieur le Président, la France est très préoccupée par la menace grave qui pèse sur la sûreté et la sécurité des installations nucléaires ukrainiennes. La centrale de Zaporizhzhia, la plus grande d'Europe, a été saisie de force par la Russie au mois de mars dernier dans le cadre de son agression injustifiée et injustifiable contre l'Ukraine. La présence
The presence and actions of Russian armed forces near the plant significantly ramp up the risk of an accident with potentially devastating consequences. Russia bears the responsibility for this situation. Russia must hand back to Ukraine full control over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, as well as all other Ukrainian nuclear facilities. As underscored by the Secretary General today, all the personnel and military facilities must urgently be withdrawn from the plant. Ukrainian staff operating the plant must be able to conduct their work without threat or pressure. Russia's control over Ukrainian nuclear facilities is a danger to the Ukrainian people and beyond for the region and the whole of the international community. Mr. President, France hails and supports the efforts of the IAEA's Director General. We have supported them at a high level from the beginning, and in particular we contributed to his technical assistance plan in Ukraine. France recalls the importance of the 7 pillars of nuclear safety and security defined by the IAEA's Director General. They must be respected. The IAEA's ability to verify Ukraine's peaceful nuclear activities must be able to ensure compliance with safeguards that are also compromised by Russia's actions. This must be restored. That's why I would like to underscore here the importance of allowing an IAEA mission of experts to the Zaporizhzhia plant. This mission must focus on nuclear safety and security and enable the necessary inspections to be conducted pursuant to the safeguards. The mission should be conducted with full respect for the full sovereignty of Ukraine on its territory and its infrastructure. Beyond that, the IAEA personnel should have access to all Ukrainian nuclear facilities safely and unhindered. The agency must be able to directly and without interference communicate with Ukrainian staff in charge of running the facilities. Mr. President, France reiterates its indefatigable support for the independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Since the 24th of February, we have borne witness to the devastating human cost of the Russian aggression. Russia must immediately withdraw its troops from Ukraine and halt its dangerous headlong charge in the country. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for her statement. I give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Agradecemos la convocatoria
We are grateful for the convening of this briefing to the Security Council, and we thank the IAEA Director General Rafael Mariano Grossi for his briefing on the critical situation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. The statements by the nuclear plant's controller on the effects of the attacks that happened last weekend are a source of great concern indeed. It escapes no one here that a nuclear accident could have devastating consequences on a global scale. That is specifically why we completely unambiguously reiterate that any attack on nuclear facilities is unacceptable, in line with what was established by the IAEA General Conference in 2009. Any attack or threat against nuclear facilities used for peaceful purposes represents a violation of the principles of the UN Charter, international law, and the very statutes of the agency. Moreover, such attacks violate international humanitarian law, including the 1949 Geneva Conventions and the first additional protocol thereto of 1977. These were ratified by the parties to the conflict, and for this reason, such parties have absolutely no justification for failing to comply with them. The prevailing situation in Zaporizhzhia over the last few days is part of a deplorable pattern of attacks on civilian infrastructure. Mexico calls for respect for the obligation not to attack civilian objects. This includes not conducting indiscriminate or disproportionate attacks. International law, international humanitarian law, and nuclear security conventions must be respected without exception. As noted by Director General Grossi, we are facing a real risk of a nuclear disaster. The humanitarian consequences of such a disaster would be catastrophic both for human health and for the environment. We echo the call of the Secretary General to allow, in short order, an inspection by the IAEA of the Zaporizhzhia plant. We urge that no obstacles nor conditions must be imposed to enable such inspections to take place. Such a mission would provide us with objective, accurate and independent information on the prevailing conditions at the plant, which are urgent to understand. I conclude by expressing our support for the IAEA's efforts to generate the right conditions to stabilize the plant. We urge its Director General to continue to inform this Council of the developments in nuclear security, as he has just done. Finally, these grave vicissitudes once again demonstrate that it is urgent to find a diplomatic solution to the conflict, leading to a cessation of hostilities. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of Mexico for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of Ireland.
Thank you, President. And I would like to thank Director General Grossi for his briefing. The IAEA has an indispensable role in supporting Ukraine to ensure nuclear safety and security at all facilities in that country, especially since Russia's invasion, and you have our full backing in your work. President, Ireland is deeply concerned by the situation at the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant and the strong risk of a radiological accident or incident arising from military activity at the site. Such an incident could have devastating consequences for the people of Ukraine, who have already suffered so much from the actions of the Russian Federation. It would also have serious consequences for the wider region. Let us make no mistake. The issues at Zaporizhzhia arise solely from the unjust and unprovoked war waged by Russia against Ukraine. The reckless actions of the Russian military forces in Ukraine have already demonstrated their utter disregard for nuclear safety and security, including in their violent, illegal seizure and occupation of the Zaporizhzhia facility. Their actions raise real fears of a significant radiological, chemical, or biological accident in Ukraine. Director General Grossi has previously set out the basic principles of nuclear safety and security that should be respected. We call on Russia, and indeed all states, to commit themselves to these 7 pillars of nuclear safety and security regarding peaceful nuclear facilities and materials in all circumstances, including in situations of armed conflict. President, while we meet here today, in other parts of this building, delegates are gathered for the review conference on the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. The NPT forms the cornerstone of the international nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation architecture. Russia's actions in Ukraine risk undermining all 3 pillars of work under this important treaty. We urge the Russian Federation not to violate or undermine such essential multilateral instruments upon which our collective security depends. President, in calling for today's discussion, Russia is seeking to avoid its responsibilities and to distract from what is really happening because of its unjustified and unprovoked war on Ukraine. We again urge the Russian Federation to stop using the Security Council to try to advance its campaigns of disinformation. If Russia is serious about safety at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, what it needs to do is clear. End its illegal occupation of the site, withdraw its troops and munitions, so that the Ukrainian authorities, with the IAEA, can uphold their responsibilities for safety and security at the site. The IAEA Board of Governors has also set this out in its resolution at its special session in March. Finally, President, Ireland calls again on Russia to end its brutal war against the Ukrainian people and withdraw its troops from the entire internationally recognised territory of Ukraine, and to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of its neighbours. Thank you.
Thank you for a statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the UK.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Director General Grossi, for briefing us once again on the situation in Ukraine. The United Kingdom remains deeply concerned about the ongoing impacts of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine and, in the context of today's meeting, its effects on nuclear safety. The Council discussed Russia's reckless actions at the Ukrainian nuclear facilities, including Chernobyl and Zaporizhzhia, at the start of the invasion. On the 3rd of March, the IAEA Board of Governors adopted a resolution calling for Russia to cease all actions against and at all nuclear facilities in Ukraine, so that the competent Ukrainian authorities could regain full control and ensure their safe and secure operation. And the IAEA could resume their important safeguards verification activities. Now, over 5 months later, Russia's control of the Zaporizhzhia plant continues. The competent Ukrainian authorities and IAEA inspectors are still prevented from properly carrying out their essential duties. As Director General Grossi has said, Russia's actions have violated almost all of his 7 pillars of nuclear safety and security. Russia's actions are contrary to the principles of the Convention on Nuclear Safety and other international nuclear safety conventions, and they put at jeopardy the safety of millions who would be affected by a nuclear incident in Ukraine. President, in light of this, and despite Russia's continued lies and obfuscation in this chamber about its brutal and irresponsible assault, we should be clear. It is Russia's continued invasion and military presence that is putting the plant at risk and thereby endangering the local population, the wider region, and the entire international community. President, we welcome Director General Grossi's efforts to strengthen nuclear safety and security in Ukraine in challenging circumstances, and the tireless, heroic efforts of the Ukrainian nuclear facility's staff, despite the immense pressure they are under. We reiterate our call for IAEA inspectors to be permitted access to all nuclear facilities in Ukraine to address nuclear safety, security, and safeguard concerns in a manner that respects Ukraine's sovereignty over its territory and infrastructure. In this regard, we note with appreciation Foreign Minister Kuleba's letter to Mr. Grossi and the Secretary General on this issue. And we once again call on Russia immediately to withdraw its forces from Ukraine and return full control of all Ukraine's nuclear facilities to their rightful sovereign owner to ensure their safe and secure operation. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement. I shall now make a statement. In my capacity as the representative of China, colleagues, I thank Director General Grossi for his briefing. China has been closely following the issue of the safety and security of the nuclear facilities in Ukraine and is deeply concerned by the recent attack on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. According to the information obtained by the IAEA from Ukraine's nuclear regulator, the attack did not pose an immediate threat to nuclear safety, and the radiation level remained normal. Nevertheless, the attack did cause damage to the physical integrity of the plant, its safety and security system, power supply and personnel safety, and sounded a nuclear alarm to the international community. The safety and security of nuclear sites must not be subject to trial and error. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is one of the largest such plants in Europe. If a large-scale accident occurs at this plant, the consequences would be more devastating than that of the Fukushima nuclear accident. The leakage of massive quantities of radioactive materials caused by the Fukushima nuclear disaster and the resulting nuclear contaminated water have far-reaching consequences, repercussions for the marine environment, food safety, and human health, thereby sparking widespread interest and concern. China does not want to see the same risks playing out again. We call on the parties concerned to exercise restraint, act with caution, refrain from any action that may compromise nuclear safety and security, and spare no effort to minimize the possibility of accidents. China always supports the IAEA's active role in promoting nuclear safety and security and performing its safeguards duties in strict accordance with its mandate. We have noted that Director General Grossi and the IAEA team of experts have been planning to visit the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Secretary General Guterres has also issued an appeal for this purpose. Russia has undertaken to provide necessary assistance to the visit. We are also aware that Ukraine, in its letters to Director General Grossi and Secretary General Guterres dated August 9th, underscored the increasing necessity of organizing such a visit. We hope that existing obstacles can be cleared as soon as possible so that the mission by Director General Grossi and IAEA team of experts can materialize without delay, and they will be able to conduct their work without impediment. Colleagues, the Ukraine crisis has been dragging on for over 5 months. The security risks posed by the conflict to nuclear facilities are looming large throughout. Only by defusing the situation and restoring peace at an early date can we fundamentally remove nuclear risks, reduce misjudgment, and avoid accidents. Once again, we call on all parties concerned to resume negotiations as early as possible, seek a solution to the Ukraine crisis in a cool-headed and rational fashion, address each other's legitimate security concerns, build a balanced, effective, and sustainable security architecture so as to achieve common security. It is China's consistent position that the purposes and principles of the UN Charter should be upheld, state sovereignty and territorial integrity be respected. We call upon all parties in the international community to act responsibly to facilitate a proper solution of the crisis, and step up political and diplomatic efforts in order to create conditions for the protagonists to return to the negotiating table. China will continue to play a constructive role in this regard. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, once again, none of our Western colleagues decided to call a spade a spade. Namely, that it is the armed forces of Ukraine that are recklessly shelling the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. It seems that we alone created any risk there. That is to say that the shelling by the Ukrainian Armed Forces of a nuclear power plant, what is that then? Is that a response to these risks, to the risks created by Russia? This is surreal, faulty logic, but we're in no way surprised by that. For 6 months now, we've been seeing not only a disinformation war unleashed against us, but a war of lies. Our Western colleagues have long chosen what they believe to be a faultless tactic when discussing all sorts of subjects around Ukraine. That is to say, to, in a coordinated fashion, blame Russia for everything that is happening within the zone of hostilities, and any even hypothetical guilt on the part of Kiev is refuted. That happened with the provocation over Bucha and Irpin and in Kramatorsk. And incidentally, please tell me, why is it that references to the events in Kramatorsk have disappeared from the radar, where more than 50 people were killed in a railway station from a multiple launch rocket system strike? That's because it was a Ukrainian Grad rocket launcher with a Ukrainian military serial number, and that can't be refuted. The recent Amnesty International report, and that's an organization that you could hardly call pro-Russian, stated what we have seen at every meeting on Ukraine since the beginning of the special military operation. Namely, the Ukrainian Armed Forces and Ukrainian nationalist battalions are using the civilian population as a human shield and using residential buildings as firing points, deploying heavy weaponry and artillery in hospitals, schools and kindergartens. What complaint over that was there in the West, and how bold of Amnesty International to blame the Ukrainian side of anything. It's like the saying, either say something good or don't say anything at all.
Either good or nothing.
Either good or nothing.
На практике это означает,
In
что у
practice,
Киева
this means
по-прежнему
that
карт-бланш на
Kiev
любые
still has carte
преступления.
blanche for any crimes.
Вместо того, чтобы называть вещи своими именами, вы демонстрируете вопиющие двойные стандарты и чудеса изворотливости, чтобы не бросить и тени ответственности на Киев, вина которого за обстрел очевидна. В этом проявляется ваша безответственность. Вы демонстрируете неспособность брать на себя ответственность за глобальные проблемы, если они расходятся с вашими узкокорыстными
geopolitical interests.
В случае с Запорожской АЭС мы наблюдали, как в западных умах со скрипом рождалась их версия событий. Ответственность за обстрелы Запорожской атомной электростанции несет кто? Конечно же, российская сторона. Мы видели эти неуклюжие заявления. Сегодня, правда, вы, за небольшим исключением некоторых особых зевотов, обошлись без этих абсурдных
assertions.
Слишком они абсурдны, чтобы звучать из уст взрослых, солидных людей, сидящих в этом зале. Но нас поражает безответственность европейских политических элит, которые своей безоговорочной и рациональной поддержкой Киева ставят под угрозу безопасность собственных граждан. Пора поставить вопрос о наличии этих элит здравого смысла. Призываем вас, коллеги, донести до своих лидеров необходимость повлиять на киевский режим и заставить его прекратить безрассудные удары по Запорожской атомной электростанции, которые фактически делают заложниками жителей европейских государств. Ответственность за это лежит в том числе и на вас, дамы и господа. С сожалением отмечаем, что секретариат ООН не в состоянии дать трезвую оценку ситуации. Мы слышим заявления, в том числе из уст генерального секретаря ООН, что, мол, цитирую, станция может подвергнуться атаке или стать базой для нанесения атак, и призывы ее демилитаризовать. Россия не использует объекты гражданской инфраструктуры, не говоря уже о ядерных объектах военной цели. Это тактика украинских вооруженных сил, которые в нарушении норм международного гуманитарного права размещают боевые позиции вблизи гражданских объектов, прикрываясь мирными жителями, как живущими. Российские военные обеспечивают охрану
soldiers ensure the protection of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and day after day they are repelling attacks of the Ukrainian forces against this object, as I already said, in close coordination with the plant's staff. Thanks to their efforts, for the time being, it's been possible to protect the key objects of the station, of the plant, and to prevent a nuclear catastrophe. We know what the Kiev regime is capable of, and the world has witnessed that as well. Those who are calling for the withdrawal of Russian forces should realize the consequences of the fact of that facility going unprotected and it being potentially used by Kiev and nationalist groups for their most monstrous provocations. Thank you.
Thank you. The representative of the United States has asked for the floor to make a further statement. You have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I will be brief. I don't really want to repeat everything that I have already said before. I just want to again appeal to Russia to end its seizure of the Zaporizhzhia power plant and return control of the facility to the government of Ukraine. We will then see how quickly stability returns to the facility. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will also be brief. So to call a spade, let's just be very clear here. There would be no risk to nuclear safety without the illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia, an invasion that has caused countless civilian lives and an incident at a nuclear facility which exists precisely because Russia has carried out that invasion. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no more requests from the members of the Council to make any further statements, in accordance with Rule 37 of the Provisional Rules of Procedure, I'm going to give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Well, thank you, Mr. President.
distinguished members of the Security Council, and I also recognize here the representative of terrorist Russia in the permanent seat of the Soviet Union. Just half a year ago, one could hardly imagine a situation when the biggest nuclear power station in Europe is seized following an armed attack with the use of tanks and artillery, and then packed with military personnel and weaponry. The weaponry that is used to shell Ukrainian cities and villages across the Dnipro River. It is a matter of alarm that in order to divert attention from these practices, Russia has resorted to dangerous provocations, staged shelling of the NPP itself. The Russians are well known for their elaborate plans of deceit, sabotage, and cover-ups, like the one we witnessed today. A conclusion one may draw from today's torrent of deception by the Russian envoy is that when they realized that their plan had collapsed like a house of cards, Russia decided to go for broke and call for this meeting. This call looks especially cynical considering their most recent attack on the facility, which happened earlier today and directly endangered both the plant facilities and personnel. I would like to thank Director General Grossi for his briefing. He has provided us with a comprehensive update on the current situation that makes it clear that the only way to ultimately remove the nuclear threats stemming from the illegal Russian presence at the nuclear power plant is the withdrawal of the Russian troops and the return of the station to the legitimate control of Ukraine. Mr. President, Ukraine highly appreciates the efforts of the IAEA and the UN to ensure the safety and security of the Ukrainian nuclear facilities against the backdrop of the Russian invasion. As Zaporizhzhia NPP has been occupied since March the 4th, with its personnel working at gunpoint, Ukraine has been in close consultation with the IAEA about the matter. We have always underlined the importance of the full and consistent implementation by the agency of its mandate. In this regard, since the beginning of Russia's occupation of ZNPP, Ukraine has insisted on the need to send a mission to the site and negotiated its modalities with the agency. We deeply regret, therefore, that such a visit has not yet taken place due to the destructive Russian position. Despite their public declarations, the occupiers have resorted to manipulation and unjustified conditions on the mission's visit, as well as shelling of the ZNPP and Energodar, thus making the visit impossible so far. We strongly reject the attempts by Russia to escape responsibility for the delay by blaming Ukraine, by blaming the United Nations Secretary General, by blaming the UN Secretariat, as was the case not only today, but also with the Russian Foreign Ministry statement of August the 9th. This prompted Ukraine's Foreign Minister Kuleba to reiterate the extreme importance of conducting the agency's led international mission to the site in its letter to the agency's Director General and the UN Secretary General sent on August the 9th. We welcome the readiness of the agency's Director General expressed during this briefing to send the mission led by the agency
to the occupied ZNPP, which should be conducted in strict compliance with the national legislation of Ukraine and with full respect of its international obligations. We stand ready to provide the mission with all necessary assistance and facilitate its travel through Ukrainian-controlled territory. Ladies and gentlemen, let it be known that the distance between Ukraine's controlled bank of the Dnieper River and the Zaporizhzhia NPP that sits on the opposite side of the river is 5 miles. 5 miles. Be it from Nikopol or from Marganets. If Russia stops shelling these cities, what in the world will prevent the mission to cover these 5 miles? In light of the continued militarization of the ZNPP site by the Russian armed forces, its shelling and subsequent damage to and mining of certain areas of the site, it is imperative that such a mission has qualified experts in the military dimension. This can be achieved by including those experts in the mission team. Ukraine also sees a lot of added value in drawing upon relevant and extensive UN political expertise. The UN representatives will be able to make a significant contribution to the preparation of the mission's final report, thus outlining the military dimension of the critical threats and challenges to nuclear safety, security, and safeguards at the ZNPP site, stemming from its occupation and militarization by the Russian armed forces. Mr. President, it is absolutely clear that the provocative Russian practices of shelling the ZNPP and the city of Energodar pose an unprecedented threat to nuclear security for Ukraine, Europe, and the world as a whole. Russia must strictly abide by the laws and customs of war, including those relating to nuclear facilities. The shelling that took place on August the 6th shed light on how these provocations are arranged. In particular, Russian occupants present at the site at the time of the shelling, in total about 500 soldiers, and Rosatom representatives, took shelter in advance before the shelling began, while the local employees were wounded. It also speaks volumes that Russian military hardware deployed at the NPP was hidden in the powerhouses at the first and second reactors. The shelling damaged 3 radiation monitoring detectors at the dry spent fuel storage facility site, which made impossible early detection and timely response in the event of deterioration of the radiological situation or release of radiation from the spent fuel containers. On August the 7th, the Russian armed forces again resorted to shelling the Zaporizhzhia NPP site and damaged the 750 kilovolt overhead line ZNPP Kakhovska substation. As a result of the shelling, a safety trip was activated at one of the power units. Currently, this power unit is being cooled down. Consequently, there is only one remaining direction of power delivery at the Zaporizhzhia NPP. Should this last line be damaged, the Zaporizhzhia NPP will be totally de-energized. Russian plans regarding the Zaporizhzhia NPP aim at disconnecting it from the energy system of Ukraine and cutting off electricity in the south of the country. Earlier, the Russian occupiers also mined the Zaporizhzhia NPP outside the cooling pond and the banks of Kakhovka Reservoir, which borders the plant. Moreover, the Russian armed forces are using the plant as cover for shelling the Ukraine-controlled cities located on the opposite side of the Dnieper River, especially Marganets and Nikopol, with multiple launch rocket systems. Under these circumstances, the Ukrainian personnel of the Zaporizhzhia NPP continue to do their best to ensure nuclear and radiation safety, as well as to mitigate the consequences of the Russian shelling. Dear colleagues, let me underline that the Russian actions at and against Zaporizhzhia NPP completely violate practically all 7 indispensable pillars of safety and security outlined by the Director General at a meeting of the Agency Board of Governors on the 2nd of March. We demand that Russia fully implement the resolution of the Agency Board of Governors dated March the 3rd. The safety, security, and safeguards implications of the situation in Ukraine. Russia must immediately cease all actions against nuclear facilities in Ukraine and return control over all seized nuclear facilities to the Ukrainian side. The international community must continue political pressure on the aggressor state of Russia and demand full and unconditional deoccupation of the ZNPP. Ensuring the safety and security of nuclear facility cannot be seen as a goodwill gesture. This is the duty of an occupying power in accordance with international humanitarian law. Now, let me explain it to the Russian ambassador in the simplest way, step by step, in a way that even a school kid could understand. First, state it loud and clear that Russia allows an IAEA-led mission immediately and unconditionally. Do not obstruct the trip of 5 miles across the river. Second, demine the facilities of the ZNPP. Third, remove your military personnel and withdraw your weaponry. Enough games. Dear colleagues, none of us can stop the wind if it carries radiation. But together we are capable of stopping a terrorist state. And the sooner we stop Russia, the sooner Europe and the world will be able to feel safe again. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't plan to engage in a polemic with the representative of the Kiev regime and react to the flow of unconscious lies that he shared with us today. On the subject of the IAEA mission, which was interrupted by Kiev, I would suggest that you look again at our statement. It says everything very clearly. I would like to draw attention to something else, that the representative of the Kiev regime is the only one at today's meeting, even the backers of Kiev ruled out, who said that it was Russia that shelled the station that they controlled in Energodar, in which staff of the plant also work. And I would like to draw your attention to this statement by the Ukrainian side for the report, as it were. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. The IAEA Director General, Mr. Grossi, wishes to make a brief statement before the conclusion. I now give him the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for giving me the opportunity for a very, very succinct closing remark. I want to thank all members of the Council for their interventions, which are very important for us at the IAEA to comprehend, to understand even better how they see things. Of course, it is not our remit to get into the political considerations, and we recognize the obvious differences that exist. But there is something very important that I, at least personally, take from this meeting. There is a common denominator here in this room, there in New York. Everybody agrees that nuclear safety and security must be preserved. Everybody agrees and supports the 7 pillars for nuclear safety and security. And everybody believes that this mission must take place. So it's no longer a matter of if, it's only a matter of when. The when must be as soon as possible. It's only the how that needs to be addressed. And I, as I indicated in my initial briefing, I am consulting and I will be intensifying my consultations with Ukraine, with the Russian Federation, of course, the United Nations, through the United Nations Department for Safety and Security must be involved in all of this, so we can conduct the mission which is so badly needed. And I will be, of course, after that, or at any other moment, Mr. President, at the disposal of the Security Council to continue briefing on our function, our mission to support Ukraine this important hour and to restore complete safety and security around all the facilities in the country. I thank you very much for this opportunity.
I'd like to thank once again Director General Grossi for your statements and clarifications and welcome you to the Council. Now, there are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
Sticker, fast.